The deceased are alive. The Soviet physicist Alexei Priima described the path of the soul after earthly life. One of the most common arguments against the idea of life after death is the claim that no one has returned from the afterlife. This is, of course, a compelling and hard-to-refute point. However, recent research describing the experiences of people who have survived clinical death challenges this belief. These individuals stood at the boundary of two worlds and returned to tell about it, said the physicist Alexei Priima. Alexei Priima believed that the testimonies of people who had such experiences were crucial evidence that our physical world is not the only place where we exist. He pointed out that many of these individuals felt an incredible sense of lightness and peace, as though they had been freed from physical limitations. But not all. Many encountered much darker and more frightening experiences. In the 1990s, Alexei Priima headed the Center for the Study of Anomalous Contact Situations, where he and his colleagues actively investigated the reality that, in his view, the soul enters after physical death. Using modern equipment and hypnotic techniques, he sought to explain that death does not only pertain to the physical body, as commonly assumed in everyday life, but also to a part of our spiritual being. One question has always been at the heart of philosophical contemplation. What happens to a person when they leave this world? According to Priima, at the moment of physical death, the bioenergetic double separates from the person, a phenomenon we often refer to as a ghost. But what happens next? According to Priima, during this separation, much like removing a spacesuit, the luminous astral body separates from the bioenergetic double. This astral body, which has an oval shape, leaves the Earth's atmosphere. Priima explained that the soul essentially embarks on its journey to another world, leaving the physical shell behind and moving into a space that is beyond our perceptual capacity. He also describes the fate of the bioenergetic double. This energetic body, a kind of framework, serves as a spacesuit for the soul during a person's life. After death, this framework loses its function, and any remaining elements of the mind it might still possess gradually fade away. Eventually, the bioenergetic double dissolves into particles of light. As the bioenergetic double disappears, the soul continues its journey into a world invisible to us. Priima emphasizes that this process does not happen instantaneously. The soul continues to exist despite the destruction of its physical shell, moving in a direction that remains hidden from human perception. Alexei Priima elaborates that the soul can be represented through symbols. As an example, he references an Egyptian drawing created over 3,000 years ago. In this illustration, a soul is depicted leaving a person's body and being carried into another world. Priima points out that the drawing shows a death bird that picks up the soul and transports it to a world where earthly limitations apparently do not exist. In this ancient drawing, Priima explains, we can see how the soul leaves a person's body. It is symbolized by a circle with a kind of flourish, representing the loss of physical form. To illustrate his point further, the scientist also presents a photograph that his colleagues took in the year 1992. According to him, this image captures a real soul. Priima believes that this photograph is compelling evidence of what Egyptian artists attempted to convey in their drawings thousands of years ago. Questions the deceased are forbidden to answer. In his book From One Secret to Another, Alexei Priima shares stories of people who have had near-death experiences. He provides detailed descriptions of what these individuals see at the moment of death and why they return to their bodies. These experiences serve as a foundation for his reflections on life, death, and what lies beyond the boundaries of our world. Alexei Priima is convinced that people who have had a near-death experience have not actually been in the afterlife. Despite apparent evidence, he claims that none of them have entered the true otherworldly realm. This can be compared to a person who sees the river Styx but does not cross it. They can only see the entrance to another world but cannot penetrate it. We do not know what happens next, as the laws governing that world surpass our understanding and perception. We are simply incapable of grasping them, Priima explains. In his book, he provides a vivid example. One day, a doctor encountered the spirit of his deceased mother in the garden. She told him that only her physical body had died, while she herself felt more alive than ever before. Shaken by this event, the doctor could not resist and asked his mother how she was living after her death. Her answer was unexpected. "The deceased are forbidden to answer such questions," the mother said. In another reality, such questions are considered idle and impermissible. Both people who have had near-death experiences and the living cannot know what happens in the afterlife until they have completed their earthly existence. They are only able to see the entrance to that world but cannot enter it. Questions about life after death remain unanswered until earthly existence comes to an end. Alexei Priima asserts that every person is born with a specific life plan they must fulfill, and they live on Earth for as long as necessary to accomplish that plan. This view is shared by many who have had near-death experiences. They return to complete their earthly tasks and fulfill their destiny. According to Priima, the soul of a person whose death was unnatural, such as in the case of an accident, must return to this world because it likely has not completed its mission. In such cases, these souls reincarnate into a new body, usually that of a child born near the place where their previous life ended. In this way, the soul continues its existence in the same region to complete its life plan. As confirmation of his hypothesis, Alexei Priima refers to the research of Indian scientists who, over a period of 50 years, studied reports of soul migrations. These scientists collected hundreds of pieces of evidence confirming that in almost half of the cases of reincarnation, people who had prematurely departed life due to unnatural deaths later returned to a new life. The hypothesis that human souls participate in multiple reincarnations is also based on hypnosis sessions conducted by Alexei Priima and his colleagues. According to the researchers, it is impossible for a person to lie while in a state of hypnosis. Through communication with individuals in a hypnotic trance, Priima concluded that the human soul does not vanish forever after death. Instead, it participates in a mysterious process of rebirth, returning to Earth and re-entering human bodies at the moment of birth. One of the most striking cases is described by Nikolai Podsvorachka. At the edge of life and death, he experienced a state that could be described as purgatory, and to this day he recalls it with terror. This experience became a true revelation for him, one he kept secret for a long time. However, 8 years after the event, Nikolai found the courage to speak about what had happened to him beyond this world. Nikolai admits that for a long time he could not believe what he had experienced, let alone confide in anyone. His story became further evidence supporting Priima's hypothesis that the human soul continues its existence and transitions into new forms. But when Nikolai decided to share his experience with his wife, he was surprised by her reaction. Instead of the expected skepticism or mockery, she showed genuine interest and began asking questions about what had happened in that place no one can reach while alive. This marked the beginning of Nikolai Podsvorachka's story, a man who, until that moment, did not believe in near-death experiences and dismissed such accounts as unrealistic. However, his own experience profoundly changed his worldview. In the summer of 1978, Nikolai realized that his existence had not ended despite his cardiac arrest. But this life was entirely different and vastly unlike the one he had known. The last thought that haunted him before losing consciousness was about his teenage son, how he would live without his father. And then came complete oblivion. But the oblivion did not last long. Nikolai quickly regained consciousness, although his return to the world of the living was nothing like he had imagined. Everything that happened defied his atheistic worldview. As an emergency doctor who had survived a heart attack, Nikolai expected that after cardiac arrest, he would either wake up in a hospital room or, at worst, in intensive care. But the reality turned out to be completely different. When Nikolai regained consciousness, his perception of the world had changed beyond recognition. He realized that he was flying through a dark tunnel, with his speed increasing every second, as if he were plunging into infinity. Fear blended with a sense of absolute freedom and lightness, as though all the boundaries that had previously restricted his existence had vanished. Nikolai describes his experiences as follows. "I was moving at such a speed that I couldn't recognize anything around me. Everything was shrouded in darkness. But suddenly, I entered the light. It was so bright that I couldn't look directly at it. After a few moments, however, the light became less blinding, and I was able to discern my surroundings. That's when I realized that I was in a hospital room. But it looked completely different from how he remembered it. A soft, white light filled the walls, creating a sense of peace. Yet the most astonishing discovery was still ahead. Nikolai realized that his perception had fundamentally changed. Wherever he looked, he could see everything happening around him. Moreover, he was able to see through opaque objects. The strangest thing for Nikolai, however, was that he couldn't see himself. He couldn't comprehend what he looked like in this state, and this caused an agonizing feeling of emptiness. He continues his account. In this unusual state, he couldn't hear the surrounding sounds, but suddenly gained the ability to read the thoughts of the people around him. Nikolai began to perceive every single one of their thoughts and emotions. This discovery made him think even more deeply about his situation. When he thought about his family, his home came to mind, and at that very moment he was there. He entered and saw his wife. As before, he wanted to share his experiences with her. I stood in front of her and tried to explain what was happening to me, Nikolai recalls. But she couldn't see me. At one point, she simply walked right through me, and I realized that I couldn't make contact with her. That shocking moment made me understand that my reality had completely changed. Later, Nikolai experienced something he referred to as his personal purgatory. This experience left such a profound impression on his soul that, even years later, he would tremble at the thought of it. This is how Nikolai describes his experience. When I was outside my body, my entire life flashed before my eyes, starting from my childhood, from the very first days. I saw everything I had ever done, but through the lens of guilt toward my loved ones. It wasn't just a feeling of discomfort, but a real pain and deep shame. Things that had seemed insignificant to me before now appeared as enormous injustices and sources of profound regret. Despite all my attempts to convince myself that I shouldn't feel guilty, that my actions weren't that bad, I couldn't shake off this feeling. You cannot deceive your own soul when you are confronted with yourself. As Nikolai recognized and relived every dishonorable act of his life, the feeling of bitterness and regret became unbearable. At that moment, he was seized by an invisible force, like a strong wind, and was violently thrown back into the dark tunnel. He found himself again in that mysterious space and felt his rapid flight gradually slow down. The bright light, which seemed infinitely warm and inviting, began to recede, leaving a feeling of loss and longing. Then Nikolai felt himself literally being pulled back into his body. The return was extremely unpleasant and painful. He felt his body become cold, sticky, and foreign. This sensation stood in stark contrast to the peace and lightness he had experienced in the afterlife. The return to the world of the living left him with a feeling of disconnection and complete strangeness toward his physical body. Since then, Nikolai made a promise to himself. One day he would tell of his experience. His goal became not only to bring the existence of life after death closer to people, but also to emphasize the importance of how we spend our days here on Earth. For, as he believes, this has a direct influence on what awaits us on the other side. Nikolai shared his thoughts on what he experienced. After going through what lies beyond our transient world, it became unbearable for me to hear statements that no one has returned from the afterlife. Because I myself and many others who have experienced something similar are living proof of the reality of such experiences. We have returned, and that is a fact that cannot be ignored. To deny it would be showing utter stupidity. To those who claim that such a thing is impossible, I would ask a simple question. How should we have returned? In the form of revived dead? Obviously, for such people, any evidence doesn't matter. The problem is not the lack of evidence, but their refusal to accept something that goes beyond their accustomed worldview. But for those who are ready to listen and understand, I gladly share my unique experience, what I experienced in the afterlife. And what do you think of these words? Do you believe in life after death? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to not miss any new stories. All the best and good luck!